So you want to come over Monday night? I'm going to pick up some power drills, liberate my cabinets. Are you even listening to me?
Cabin in the Woods was released April 13th, 2012, directed by Drew Goddard and written by himself, as well as Joss Whedon, and is by far one of the most complex and sophisticated films of our generation, while subtly disguising itself as your typical run-of-the-mill slasher flick. An average review on my YouTube channel generally consists of a recap of the film, as well as opinions I have in instances within the film that stand out to me specifically. However, because of the sheer complexity and amount of layers this film has built into its core, I'll be taking a slightly different approach with this one, in splitting the analysis into 3 separate sections. Number 1 is the review, of course. Number 2 is the deeper overlying message of the film. And finally, number 3, each reference making up the consistency or weight of the movie overall. And with all that being said, let us begin. The movie begins by introducing us to our 5 main characters, which at first when hearing that may seem as though the film could end up feeling bloated and confusing to keep track of. However, each character gets a fairly decent amount of screen time individually in order to truly feel acquainted with the cast. And the acting across the board, even from the supporting cast members, is all magnificent. These 5 characters are our leading woman, Dana, played by Kristen Connolly, who's a college student simply going through the motions after she had a sexual encounter with one of her professors, who ended up dumping her directly after, leaving her heartbroken. However, her best friend Jules, played by Hutchison, who's the promiscuous party-all-night type of girl, wants to help Dana get back into the dating scene, and she believes she has the perfect man for her. This man is Holden, played by Jesse Williams, who, to be fair, is probably the least fleshed out of our 5 characters. However, he's a brainiac, athlete, and respecter of women. Essentially, the whole package for Dana. And the best part is that he's Jules' boyfriend Kurt, played by Chris Hemsworth's best friend from out of state, so she doesn't feel pressured by him if she's not interested. Essentially, the first section of this movie is just used to introduce these characters as specific archetypes while simultaneously giving them actual character traits to work off of. The crew are about to pack up an RV and head out countryside to what else? A cabin in the woods. As they're getting themselves settled in, the last member of the group, Marty, played by Fran Kranz, rolls up onto their street in his old beaten car with pot smoke flying out of his windows as he tokes away on a huge bong he has in his front seat, which he's able to collapse into a coffee mug to avoid any unwanted interaction. Whether it's from police or Kurt saying he can't bring a bong into his van because technically there's no rule against bringing a simple coffee mug onto the van. Also, the only real reason I stick on this point for more than just a moment is because I wanted to mention when me and my friend originally saw this film, we immediately went out and bought one, and it really does work exactly how it appears in the film. You can drink your coffee and smoke your weed all in one. It's truly the perfect bong for a proper wake and bake, so thank God for stoners, am I right? With our main characters officially introduced, I'd like to take a moment to explain what's happening behind the scenes of our heroes. Ironically enough, while driving towards the cabin, Marty mentions that he knows the government is behind every last choice the world makes, and how they control the population's minds, and so on and so forth, which most people would just assume is stoner talk. However, the government actually is watching their each and every move, because there's a government facility located directly underneath the cabin where an entire laboratory of scientists, engineers, and general workers keep an eye on the world and purposefully unleash their horror icons onto the world in an effort to appease ancient evil giant gods that used to rule the earth. You see, each time the scientists lure people back to the cabin, it's a chance for 5 sacrifices to appease these underground giants. If we appease them, they remain underground and allow us to walk freely another day, whereas if we don't follow their orders and stray away from the original plan whatsoever, they will rise and once again take over the planet, wiping out the face of the Earth, wiping the entire face of the planet clean and starting a new slate essentially. This entire side plot involving a government-run agency having complete control over the film's course has drawn many audience members to give up on it or simply not understand the message this film is attempting to convey, which again we'll get to. Back to our 5 heroes, they end up running out of gas as the average horror cliche goes. They meet a creepy old convenience store clerk named Mordecai, played by Tim Desarme, who's such an asshole. You really can't help but root for the kids as they stand up for one another against this guy. He calls Jules a whore and tells them to figure the gas pump out themselves. But luckily, right as Kurt and Marty are about to step up and beat the shit out of Mordecai, Holden steps in and breaks them up, and they all leave, finally ending up at the cabin only a short scene later. At first sight, the cabin seems about average, nothing too out of the ordinary, and in fact all 5 friends seem to thoroughly enjoy it. They all get settled into their individual rooms, and for the first day they're there, nothing truly significant happens. The scientists simply watch as the teens allow themselves to get comfortable, and in turn, let their guards down. It's during the second night that all 5 friends are sitting in the living room playing Truth or Dare, when suddenly the cellar door in the kitchen swings open, and being that it was Dana's turn on Truth or Dare, Jules dares her to go into the basement and investigate what could possibly be inside. Spoiler alert, it's bad news. What they end up finding are artifacts. Different objects linked to different outcomes based solely on which they're successful with tampering with, and all 5 end up messing around with different items. But it isn't until Dana starts reading the diary of Patience Buckner with an inscription in Latin at the bottom that the wise Marty begs that something's released, and that something is, of course, the Buckners. Unfortunately, the scientists have begun pumping pheromones into the house that rewire the brain of whoever comes in contact with it, to properly fit the character type they require for each sacrifice. These characters and their aligning traits are Kurt as the athlete, Jules as the whore, Marty as the fool, Holden as the scholar, and finally, Dana as the virgin, who I know isn't a virgin. The scientists even admit it by saying simply, "We work with what we got." The only interference with this plan is that Marty is smoking so much weed throughout the movie that the pheromones can't interact with his brain, essentially working as a counter method. And it certainly must take quite a bit of smoking because you can see the other characters take a hit off his different joints throughout the movie, but all their minds are still completely scrambled. However, it's nothing worth staying awake over. This, however, is why Marty still has a semblance of reasoning within his mind to tell them not to read the Latin. The Buckners are listed as a zombie redneck torture family, so based on zombie lore, they move slower than your average monster, which in turn gives our heroes time to get settled back in and let their guards down once again, as seemingly nothing is going wrong. As the night goes on, Jules and Kurt get wasted and end up going outside to have sex where the first kill goes down, in of course the proper order being Jules as the whore. And again, this will all make sense as we go along. Kurt races back to the house where they all barricade the doors and say they need to stick together. That is until the scientists fume even more pheromones into the cabin, forcing them all to split up into different rooms, just like your average horror movie. Marty starts freaking out in his room and ends up breaking a lamp on his bedside table, revealing one of the hidden cameras being used to watch them. Unfortunately, right as he makes this discovery, Judah Buckner smashes through the window and drags Marty off screen, only showing a splash of blood fly up from where he was taken. Holden smashes through a one-way mirror introduced much earlier on in order to save Dana. Luckily, through escaping in the basement of the house, they meet back up with Kurt, and the 3 quickly hop in the RV and speed away, hoping to escape this nightmare. But as they reach the tunnel they entered to get to their location, the scientists blow it up, obstructing their path and essentially guaranteeing them a death to the Buckners. However, through some quick wit, Kurt decides to attempt to jump the gap between them and the other side of the road that otherwise they would have needed to go through the tunnel to cross. And he'll do it on the dirt bike that they happen to have with them that was shown to be fair but not mentioned up until this point. And fairly, it seems like a decent plan to be able to contact help and escape from this godforsaken place they've been trapped in. That is until he attempts the jump and slams into a giant invisible force field full-on Borderlands 2 style. That again was shown very early on in a small moment. And Kurt tumbles down into an endless hole in the ground, but somehow the ancient gods still accept that as part of their offering, which is fortunate for the scientists, I suppose. And only moments later, while Holden is trying to calm Dana down, he just gets stabbed in the neck mid-sentence, leaving Dana on her own. We see the scientists immediately celebrating as they reveal the quote-unquote virgin sacrifice is optional as long as she suffers. So as live footage of her being brutally thrown around and beaten is on, the scientists relax, party, socialize, and of course, drink.
So much heart. You think of all the pain and the Tequila is my lady! My lady! Come on in, guys. Come on in, come on in. You're welcome. Tequila from darkness.
However, amongst the commotion, our two head agents, Sitterson and Hadley, receive an emergency phone call from their higher-ups informing them that one of the 5 teens is still alive. And in the most heroic scene ever, Marty slaps Father Buckner into the water with his coffee cup bong, saving Dana and revealing that all the blood splatter off-screen was him dismembering Judah Buckner, and he survived all along, which allowed him to find in each of the Buckner's graves there's an elevator, revealing to them that the monsters were sent to them. So with nowhere left to run, Dana and Marty jump into the elevator, which for obvious reasons reminds me a lot of Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, but instead of seeing how they make whipped cream and cotton candy, you get to see all the possible monsters that could have been sent to kill them instead of the Buckners. Each monster gets their own containment elevator. Once Dana and Marty are of course spotted, every possible SWAT member is sent out to find them, but in a quick turn of events, Dana releases all the monsters as an army to fight against the SWAT members, which is by far the best scene in the movie. To be honest, the second these two step into this laboratory, I can't take my eyes off the screen, and I've seen this movie countless times now. It's almost as if there's something new to witness with every single showing, and that's the sign of an incredible film. Each and every last agent or scientist within this facility, even the undeserving ones, receive an untimely, exceptionally gruesome, and insanely incredible death by fantasy monster. All while this chaos ensues, Dana and Marty escape to the final secret room within the facility, depths below the offices, and especially far below the cabin or any semblance of humanity. This is where the sacrifices are tallied up and judged by the Ancient Ones, only a short fall below. And this is where it's revealed, as I mentioned earlier, that the gods are here to judge them based on the 5 sacrifices or completely destroy the world. And it's explained that they have roughly 10 minutes before the final judgment is made. And if Marty isn't killed, then the slate will be wiped clean. However, Marty sides with the gods. He believes a new world is in order. He considers change to be a viable option, which based on the hell they've been through, I can't really blame him. However, Dana points a gun at him, but right before she can shoot, a monster, cough cough that I'll mention later, bites her on the neck, forcing her to drop her pistol, that Marty picks up and shoots the monster with, leaving Dana on the floor bleeding out, while the scientist who provided all the exposition, played in a very short role by Sigourney Weaver, is cast down into the depths below with the Ancient Ones along with Patience Buckner, who truly came to save the day in the end, leaving Marty to sit next to Dana and smoke one last joint as the world comes to an end, or depending how you look at it, a new beginning. Overall, Cabin in the Woods can be looked at from 2 perspectives. One is of course just another average horror comedy movie, and the other is looking inward at the deeper meaning of the film, and respecting it as something completely different in the end. There's always something new for you anytime you watch this movie, as long as you're willing to watch out for secrets in the background, or hidden messages, or references in general. This is one of the smartest films of all time, and it's never given the credit I feel like it truly deserves. The direction, acting, and cinematography are all magnificent and done at such a grade A level that it's impossible to not at least notice it. And something I often tend to skip over is the score within a film. However, this one always seems to strike the right chord at the right time with me, to create a truly exceptional, unlike anything I've ever seen before experience, that I truly feel only gets better with every viewing. Let's be honest and look at the facts. At face value, this movie seems interesting enough, but generic when hearing the concept on paper. Sure, it's fun to see all your favorite horror movie icons wrapped up into one film, but without any weight or depth behind it, it'd just end up like Transformers, all characters and nothing more. However, this movie isn't supposed to represent itself as a horror movie. It's a cry out to Hollywood. Allow me to explain. If you took out every scene involving the scientists or secret government agencies, all you'd have left is an extremely cliched, average, campy B-movie horror film, which there's nothing inherently wrong with. However, this movie bleeds so much deeper, as the gods underneath the facility actually represent us as an audience, visiting horror movies each year. If you're someone who can go see the same movie over and over with the same character archetypes over and over just to see violence, drugs, and sex over and over, then you fall under the scientist category. The group of individuals who support the mainstream movies that do just that, and make no effort whatsoever to change the formula to the movies we've seen again, over and over. However, on the other hand, Marty and the ancient gods underneath us represent a figurative clean slate, an actual chance to move forward with new ideas, new passions. For instance, nearly every horror movie that comes out in America is either a sequel or remake. I mean, they're continuing Halloween again. Enough said. There's nothing wrong with enjoying the same basic plot over and over again. It's what makes things like Marvel so incredibly successful, because they found a formula that sticks and works for their audiences. However, there will come a day when the ancient god in all of us rises against these same works being done time and again, and will fight for a new start and a clean slate as well. And that's when movies will be back to what they were when they first originally began airing. Nowadays, audiences take for granted how much time and effort goes into an original story and interesting cinematography or exceptional acting, because just like the government agents in this movie, we've grown accustomed to this sort of lifestyle, and unless there's a change, as Marty said, then we'll just continue down this road until the end of time. To wrap up this analysis, and in my opinion, saving the best for last, these are all the references, that I could find at least, that make up the foundation that this movie was built on. A majority of the movie, including the title itself, is a reference to Evil Dead, which is honestly where the movie takes most of its inspiration from, all the way down to the cellar door flying open, within, of course, the cabin in the woods. There are several nods to other horror movies, such as the RV referencing The Hills Have Eyes. The voices Marty keeps hearing in his head is from the Amityville Horror. The cubes used to store away the monsters are a subtle reference to the movie Cube. Or Mordecai, the eerie gas station attendant who warns them of their nightmare yet to come, in reference to just about every horror movie ever made. With these simpler tie-ins out of the way, let's move into what everyone wants to see. The monsters, of course. Beginning with the whiteboard, with the scientist's betting pool, we have the werewolf, a classic Universal horror monster, voted on by finance and summoned by an amulet. The alien beast, a facehugger from the Alien series, voted on by Biomed and possibly summoned by an alien egg. The mutants are either a reference to The Hills Have Eyes 2006 remake or Chernobyl Diaries, voted on by the Demolition Department and summoned by tampering with the gas mask and tonics. The Wraith, Scottish dialect for ghost or spirit, voted on by no one and possibly summoned by an urn. Zombies, a classic George Romero creation, voted on by the Chem Department and most likely summoned by a chemical tank. Reptilius is the creature from the Black Lagoon, also referencing Jurassic Park, voted on by no one and possibly summoned by a reptile claw. The clown has several references, however resembling Pennywise from It most of all, voted on by Electric and summoned using the fortune teller machine. Witches, of course from 1800s folklore, voted on by operations and possibly summoned by a broomstick. Sexy witches are a reference to The Craft, voted on by archives and possibly summoned by a magic wand or a spell book. Demons are of course an ancient biblical antagonist, voted on by no one and possibly summoned by a magic spellbook. Fornicus, Lord of Bondage and Pain, or the Hell Lord, is a direct reference to Hellraiser, voted on by Sitterson and summoned after unlocking his spherical orb puzzle, also referencing the Lamarckin's box or the Lament configuration from the same series. The Angry Molesting Tree, a reference to Evil Dead, voted on by Wrangle and possibly summoned by a jar of tree sap. The Giant Snake is a reference to Anaconda, Python, Mega Snake, and any other weird giant snake movies that exist. Voted on by Internal Logistics and possibly summoned by a snakeskin. Deadites are a direct reference to Evil Dead, voted on by the Story Department and assumedly summoned by the Necronomicon. Kevin has no real information on him, but he's described as a sweet-looking guy who on the surface appears to be normal, but underneath is a psychotic killer who dismembers people. Compared to Norman Bates and voted on by no one, he's summoned by playing an old film strip. The Mummy, a classic Universal horror monster, voted on by psychologists and possibly summoned by an ancient Egyptian dagger. The Bride is a reference to just about any Bride monster character such as Bride of Frankenstein or Bride of Chucky, voted on by digital analysis and summoned by wearing the necklace displayed on the wedding dress. The Scarecrow Folk are a reference to Night of the Living Scarecrow or Husk, voted on by the DNA archives and possibly summoned by a scarecrow head or a pitchfork. The snowman is a direct reference to Jack Frost, voted on by the communications department and summoned by a snow globe. The dragon bat is a reference to hybrid monster movies such as Sharktopus, but based on its design, a more likely reference is to the vampires of Blade 2. Voted on by no one and possibly summoned by blurry photographs, such as those of the Loch Ness Monster or Bigfoot. Vampires, the classic universal horror monster, voted on by the distribution department and summoned by a bottle of vampire breath. The dismemberment goblins are a reference to Gremlins or Labyrinth, voted on by no one and possibly summoned by a toy box or a comic book. The sugar plum fairy is a distorted version of the classic Nutcracker character, voted on by no one and summoned by twirling a music box and allowing the song to play out. The merman is a classic universal horror monster, voted on by Hadley and summoned by blowing into a conch shell. The reanimated are a reference to the creations of H.P. Lovecraft, voted on by the administration department and possibly summoned using a serum. The unicorn is a classic fantasy monster, voted on by the engineering department and summoned by tampering with the unicorn tapestry. The Huron is a stereotypical early depiction of a Native American, voted on by the R&D department and summoned by banging on the Huron's drum. The Sasquatch, Wendigo, or Yeti is a reference to various Native American legends, better known as Bigfoot. Voted on by no one, according to Drew Goddard, this character would have been summoned by a jar of Eau du Sasquatch. However, this could have been a joke. The dolls are a reference to the Strangers, voted on by the kitchen staff, and summoned by donning one of their masks in the basement. The Doctors are a reference to countless evil doctors, from the Human Centipede to Dr. Satan in House of a Thousand Corpses. Voted on by accounting and possibly summoned by surgical equipment. The zombie redneck torture family, or our main characters, the Buckners, voted on by maintenance and Ronald the intern, and summoned by reading Patience Buckner's diary and the Latin curse aloud. The jack-o'-lantern is a reference to the legend of Sleepy Hollow. Voted on by security, it is believed he's summoned by lighting 3 jack-o'-lantern candles simultaneously in the basement. The giant is a reference to ancient Greek mythology, voted on by the zoology department, and no real information has been released on the summoning of this creature, so with that in mind, it's possible it's summoned by a giant club or a bag of beans. And the final monster on the whiteboard are the twins, a direct reference to The Shining, voted on by no one, and summoned by using a small pair of stuffed animals. While we may be down the whiteboard, there's still a ton of monsters seen only either behind the scenes or for nothing more than a brief instance. These are Alma Wade from the video game series Fear, the Ancient Ones paying clear homage to the Cthulhu mythos, the Balding Menace who has pale blue or gray skin and wears a butcher's apron, the Blob, a direct reference to the movie of the same name, the Boomer, a special infected from Left 4 Dead, the Bullhead Phantom is a reference to the Phantoms in Time Bandits. Similarly, the Cow Skull Giant is again inspired by the Phantoms in Time Bandits. Creature with patterned segments of armor on its head resembles a troll and green dismemberment goblin. The Creeping Shadow is a generic shadow creature, such as a ghost. The Cthulhu creature is the size of an average person with the head of the aforementioned mythical beast, and is a reference to the story The Call of Cthulhu by H.P. Lovecraft. The Cyclops, straight out of Greek mythology. The Dark Spirit is a possible reference to the Dementors from Harry Potter. The Face Peeler is a possible reference to the face-peeling scene in Poltergeist. The Floating Leech creature vaguely resembles the Ass Weasels from Dreamcatcher. The Flock of Killer Birds is likely a reference to Alfred Hitchcock's The Birds. The Four-Legged Saddle creature is possibly a reference to Megalania or the creatures of Silent Hill. The Garden Gnome Boy is a reference to Troll or Leprechaun. The Giant Alligator could possibly be a reference to the 1980 film Alligator and its following 1991 sequel, Alligator 2: The Mutation. But it could also just as easily simply just be a big alligator. The giant ant is a reference to the 1954 film Them. The giant ape is a direct reference to King Kong, used by the Buenos Aires quarter in an attempt to fulfill the ritual, but fails. The giant cat is a simple joke monster inspired by the trope of anything becoming Titanic-sized and instantly becoming a threat. Giant centipedes are a reference to giant monster movies in general. The giant crow is a possible link to the giant claw. The giant deer is a mostly real-world World Fear, however a small link to Ring 2 in which a deer attacks the protagonist's vehicle. Giant ferrets are a possible reference to the 1959 B-movie The Killer Shrews. The giant floating head is inspired by Middle Eastern folklore of supernatural spirits and genies. The giant insects are inspired by various films about giant insects. The giant lizard is a possible reference to the 1959 movie Attack of the Giant Gila monster. The giant owls were meant as another gag monster, but could have also been a possible link to the Goblin King in Jim Henson's Labyrinth. The giant tarantula is inspired by the movie Tarantula. The giant woman is a direct reference to Attack of the 50-Foot Woman. The gladiator demon is likely a reference to the demon named Lord of Darkness. Gorillas again inspired by King Kong. The Hell Lord minions are a reference to the Cenobites from the Hellraiser series as well. The humanoid is a reference to House of the Dead 3. The hunter, a special infected from Left 4 Dead. Kiko, or the Japanese floating girl, is a direct reference to Ringu, The Ring, and its sequel, and the newest Rings. It's used in the Japan branch and fails, being turned into a happy frog. The Mecha Scorpion is a possible reference to HAL from 2001: A Space Odyssey. The Ku Klux Klan is an actual white supremacist terrorist organization. The Kraken is a reference to several works of fiction, including but not limited to Jimmy Neutron. The man in a transparent tarp is a reference to Patrick Bateman from American Psycho. The Mutant Girl is a possible reference to Lisa Trevor from the Resident Evil video games. The Ogre, originating from Scandinavian and Germanic folklore, are cannibalistic giants. The Pale Serpent strongly resembles the Mongolian Deathworm. The Prince of Darkness is a possible reference to Nosferatu, or even Ozzy Osbourne sharing the same nickname. Pterodactyls are a flying species of dinosaurs, presently extinct for 65 million years. The puffy tentacle creature bears a slight resemblance to Audrey 2 from Little Shop of Horrors. Rabid dogs that are vicious and have been used in all genres of film for years, a real-life threat. The Reaver is a direct reference to the Reavers in Firefly, who rape, torture, murder, skin, and eat their victims. The Savage with a Hatchet is a direct reference to The Hills Have Eyes. The slimy horned cloak creature is very reminiscent of swamp monsters. The Smoker, another special infected from Left 4 Dead. The Old Man is inspired by creepy old men in most horror movies, such as the old men from Phantasm or See No Evil. The Red Fiend is inspired by several demons in films, while bearing quite a resemblance to the monster in the 1986 film The Monster in the Closet. The Suffocator is inspired by methodical serial killers. The Undead Warmonger is possibly a reference to the 1986 film House. The Witch and the Tank are both special infected zombies from the Left 4 Dead series. Just to point out, the reason there are so many references to this game are because originally the movie was supposed to have a tie-in level with the game, where you'd fight through the cabin and end up running through the laboratory to the end. However, the idea was scrapped, but the character models remained inside the movie, which, as a huge fan of both, I 100% support this decision. The Troll is a simple generic Scandinavian folklore character. And last but not least, the two-headed creature is possibly inspired by Troll Hunter. In conclusion, Cabin in the Woods is filled to the absolute brim with content. Whether it be the deeper message being taught, that certainly can be interpreted in many different ways, and similar to the thought process behind this film, it promotes creative thinking, and not continuing on the same path as everything or everyone else. Or whether you're just in the mood for an expertly paced gore fest with a very lighthearted tone while simultaneously having some huge stakes to look after. And because of how each character is set up, audiences can genuinely understand their motives for every last thing they do, as well as feel for them as they're controlled to do the same things. If you look at this movie at face value and just see a not-so-scary horror movie with too much humor, then you won't find any enjoyment, because it appears to be just another run-of-the-mill slasher fest in the same vein as the Scream series. However, by following their own path and creating something different, they've split audiences into two. Either people love this movie or outright hate it, but I can say it's at least worth seeing for yourself if you haven't already. It's such an incredible film experience and truly shows the artistic value of filmmaking at its highest peak in performance. Drew Goddard and Joss Whedon created one of the most incredible crossover events and action-packed slasher flicks in just an hour and 35 minutes, making the runtime flow exceptionally. And that's not to mention how top-notch the acting is from every last character, even the side actors. It keeps you so invested in this small world they've built up in the woods on the mountainside. that it's so expertly crafted that you feel as though you're trapped alongside the characters, and feel as though we've experienced the slate being wiped clean alongside Marty and Dana. As the Ancient Ones awaken and reclaim their world, and possibly a clean slate is exactly what the world needs. How else would we get such incredible works of film like this? And for all these reasons, I'm giving The Cabin in the Woods a flawless 10 out of 10, A+. This is truly one of the greatest films of all time, and I can't recommend seeing it enough. Whether you're in the mood for an action movie, a monster movie, a comedy movie, a horror movie, or even a drama movie, it has something for everyone, and of course something new on each viewing, sending this film to the heavens of marvelous filmmaking alongside the greats. And I know this movie will be remembered for years and years to come because of its unbelievable contribution to the entire movie industry as a whole.